Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on February the 14th, 2016. Now this is part 2 of From the Master's Mouthpiece, because it's all connected. All these articles I read and mention and discuss and analyze are completely connected. Nothing is by accident in this world. It's quite amazing that folk get little bits and bytes, literally, of news, and they think they're informed with things, but they don't put anything together, actually. And the media certainly will not do it for you, because their job is to give you scattered little bits and bytes without forming the conclusions, especially if it's against, basically, the agenda. The last thing anyone wants when you've got a great plan underway is to have it exposed and how it works and so on, and how you've been fooled. So, of course, you're always being fooled all the time pretty well. I want to mention, too, that in this age of global warming, whenever everything's supposedly getting fried with the heat and all the rest of it, because we're causing it all, we're the big problem. And, in fact, that Ministry of Defense think tank that came out with their usual report on the future, how it's going to be. Remember, they advise the policies for NATO, all the NATO armies and air forces and navies and so on, and for the world. And this is the public version, so they always elaborate much, much more deeply in the private version for those in the know themselves, in other words. They go through population. On every other page it's mentioned population. You get the inference, of course, from population control, and that's why the articles I'm reading here are so vitally important. It's no coincidence, as I've said so many times, that people are going sterile across the Western world, etc. It's no coincidence at all. It's not happening by itself. But getting back to the global warming and all this kind of stuff, on Friday night, the temperature plummeted, of course, throughout a good part of Canada into the US. And by 8 a.m. in the morning of Saturday, yesterday, it was minus 43 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about the same really in centigrade. They basically balance out the two scales around 40. But it's about 43 degrees minus, and with the wind chill factor, it probably was about minus 50. So this is global warming for you. Of course, the next day, of course, they never really say much about it. They don't alter what their predictions were for the weather forecasts, which are always way underestimated when it comes to cold. Because they want it to seem in the charts, when they go for the charts at the end of the year and come out with, well, it was the warmest winter on record, etc., then they can always take their fake predictions as though it had actually happened. But I always keep a chart of what they say and another chart of what actually does happen with the dates on them. It's interesting to do that. Now, getting back to the topic again, sterility and all the rest of it, it's no coincidence that all this is happening. Same with the Zika virus and so on. When you see who's involved in promoting the massive hype and fear, who stands to gain from it, well, you've got the big World Health Organization pushing, terrifying fear, blah, blah. Your baby might be this, might be that, and all through all these third world countries, because that's the main enemy at the moment. They've already sterilized a good part of the West, but they want to reduce vastly the population of the third world countries too. And so, abort your child is the message, you see. And the Planned Parenthooders and all the rest of them are jumping on the act as well. And Big Pharma, naturally, with their abortion pills, in the early phases of pregnancy, they abort them. And everything's so casual now, casual sex, casual abortion, everything's casual, until you're in a society where naturally the devaluation of human life is rampant through the whole culture for generations now, till it's normal. So when your masters want to exterminate you, they'll be just as casual about that too, won't they? So here we go with the next list, another boring list for a lot of people, but there's a lot of people too that I really am looking for. These are the people I look for, the ones who can handle this kind of thing, who have a thirst to know and how things, like a jigsaw puzzle, all fit together. Now, this article is from 2009. British scientists condemn using children in GM food trials as unacceptable. Then they go back to the ethic rules that were set up back at the Nuremberg trials in Germany, the end of after World War II. And it says youngsters aged 6 to 10 were fed so-called golden rice, which has been modified to contain enhanced levels of beta-carotene or vitamin A. Now that's the push for it, you see. That's what they told the public. The rice is being developed to combat vitamin A deficiency linked to damage to that site, poor brain development, and immune system failure. However, high consumption can also have harmful toxic side effects and cause birth defects. Critics are furious that GM rice was not put through animal feeding trials to ensure it was safe before giving to children. See, as I've told you, everything's go casual now, you know. This is what happens when when all morality has been tossed out the window before your own generation. I've been from the 60s, definitely, you know, and rampaging onwards. The decision to use the children has been condemned as completely unacceptable by a group of 22 scientists, all GM critics from Britain around the world. Claim it's indicative of moves by the biotech lobby led by the USA and biotech firms to force GM food into the mouths of the world without proper assessment. It was financed and run through the U.S. National Institutes of Health and involved children in China and America. The scientists have written an open letter to the team behind the experiments condemning the way they were conducted. States were writing to express a shock, an unequivocal denunciation of the experiments being conducted by your colleagues, which involved the feeding of GM rice, golden rice, to human subjects. It says that there's a large body of evidence showing GM food production can trigger gene mutations, which can result in health-damaging effects. They know it can cause cancer and all the rest of it when they've actually feed it to animals long before they tried it on children. It says our greatest concern is that the rice, which is engineered to overproduce beta-carotene, has never been tested in animals. It says there's evidence that certain chemicals derived from beta-carotene are both toxic, cause birth defects. And the critics say the Nuremberg Code states that children under 10 are not considered legally capable of giving consent to participation in such experiments. Now, remember in Canada, throughout the 90s, the Canadian citizenry across the whole country were the guinea pigs for GM-modified vegetables without their consent because the government had signed it, and it came out later when it was exposed only through Britain. We didn't know in Canada. So they had to start talking about in Canada when it was exposed in Britain, and that the government in Canada had made a secret, and that's what came out in the newspapers here eventually, a secret deal with the big biotech companies like Monsanto and so on. And we've been on it for 10 years and being studied, you see, because the National Health Service system and all data from all medical problems from every individual being fed directly to Ottawa, by the way. They actually set up two special computers eventually, but one in Ottawa. There was a big stink about that. They said it was for something else, but it was to feed all this data directly there. And they could watch the cancer rates and sterility rates and all the problems without ever telling the public what might be behind it, you see. Quite something, isn't it? And casual again, isn't it? It's just casual decisions. You know, they'll never know. You know. The list of signatories to the protest letter includes Malcolm Hooper, professor of medicine, chemistry at Sunderland University. This type of experimentation is frightening, using children as lab rats and so on. And then going about immorality, blah, blah, against people and children. And the different people who signed it all. And it says project manager at the Golden Rice Organization, Dr. Adrian Duboc, denied the Nuremberg Code had been breached. Of course they always do. He said the feeding trials had been approved by independent ethical review panels. That's what they call bioethicists, which we used to call eugenicists. Yeah. says parents were not given financial rewards for their children's participation to avoid undue pressure on poor families, but children were rewarded with school bags and pencils and paper as a thank you for participating, he said. If you were in a prison or a gulag, they'd probably give you a normal portion of the food for the day instead of the meager stuff they starved them with. But now they give you school bags and pencils. I remember too, there was articles on golden rice I read years ago because it was a Rockefeller, I think, brothers organization that were behind it all. And there were complaints at the time that, and not complaints actually, there was approval, and I think it was from, I could be wrong, but I think it was the World Health Organization, because it said it tended to temporarily sterilize the people eating it. But probably won't be in this article here. But I'll have to have a hunt for that one. Probably gone down the memory hole by now if you look for it again, no doubt. Everything does. And then, alleged GM experiment raises fear for parents. That was 2012, updated. Parents of children in Hunan province who took part in a study allegedly involving genetically modified rice have expressed concerns over possible health hazards. Again, there's a usual pro and con. The ones who say deny it, that this has got any harmful effects, the ones behind it, and the ones who are definitely wary of it, and so on. And it says that one of them says, I learned about the US research paper on the internet. It said, Ziohua says, I'm really scared, as in China. My daughter took part in a study. Now she looks smaller than other children the same age. I don't know if that's related to the study. And the daughter, aged 11, was one of the more than 60 children at Jiangku Primary School who participated in the nutrition study on the transformation of carotene in vegetables to vitamin A in children's bodies. Remember going way back into the, was it the 80s or 70s? It must have been the 70s maybe. But Kissinger came out with a memo basically, that the world state, the greatest threat to the state was, and to the US as well, was overpopulation. And that's when all this really kicked off into high gear. The Rockefellers had been into the same thing as a major concern of theirs for a long time too. And then here's the scary stuff too. Back GM food or children will die. Start warning from Environment Secretary as the row grows over the controversial crops. Owen Patterson said children are dying because GM food isn't being adopted. And 17 million farmers now grow GM products around the world, but resistance to the so-called Frankenstein foods have slowed uptake in the EU. And that's back in 2013. And of course, they'll get paid off by the big companies to do glowing things and scare things again. Oh, fear's great for selling, It's fantastic. You're getting anything done. Just create massive, scary scenarios, as they call it. Scientists warn of link between dangerous new pathogen and Monsanto's Roundup. That was 2011. The pathologist experienced in protecting against biological warfare recently warned the USDA of a new self-replicating microfungal virus-sized organism which may be causing spontaneous abortions in livestock, sudden death syndrome in Monsanto's Roundup Ready soy, and wilt in Monsanto's RR corn. And I wouldn't eat anything with soy in it because that's always been heavily modified for the longest time. And they were getting cancers and rats that they fed in their stomachs and so on, intestines, from this stuff long, long ago when they were using GM soy. But this is Dr. Don H. Huber. And by the way, it's that soya. They use soya flour, 2 grain of flour. This modified stuff. It's in everything. All candies have it in. Chocolates, everything. So it's not safe to eat any of their stuff anymore. Mr. Don H. Huber, who coordinates the Emergent Diseases and Pathogens Committee of the American Phytopathological Society as part of the USDA National Plant Disease Recovery System, warned Agricultural Secretary Tom Vilsack that the pathogen threatens the U.S. food and feed supply and can lead to the collapse of the U.S. corn and soy export markets, etc. And then you have, here, it's quite interesting, GM Watch, Genetically Modified Food Watch. And it says that the growing threat to genetically engineered trees. This award-winning documentary film, there's a film out actually, they had it back out in 2010, explores the growing global threat of genetically engineered trees to our environment and to human health. And it goes into the video, EFSA's conflicts of interest on GM insects, it says here. And it's going to affect all wildlife and humans and all the rest of it too. And I'll just skip through parts of the article. It goes on to say here, the EFSA's working group on GM insects helped to develop the proposed rules. It includes a researcher at Oxford University who's being funded by the UK Biotechnology and Biological Sciences Research Council to work with the UK company Oxitec, you're back to Bill Gates bunch again, on developing GM insect regulations. Oxford University is an investigator in the company, and would profit. Who owned, of course, at that time. If commercial releases of GM insects were to be approved, at least 4 other members of the working group have current or past links with Oxitec, having worked on joint research projects or co-authored papers, and 2 further members work for the International Atomic Energy Agency program on the use of GM insects. Interestingly, the International Atomic Energy Agency involved with insects. And Oxitec back then had released millions of GM mosquitoes in experiments in the Cayman Islands, Malaysia and Brazil, and is developing GM agricultural pests, including GM olive flies, fruit flies, cabbage moths, and bollworms, which is a cotton pest. Most of Oxitec's senior staff, some board members, including its chair, and consultants have worked for multinational agricultural company Syngenta, which has funded some of its research. Quite an interesting article, actually. It goes on quite a long rate and so on. And we're going to introduce them into large numbers of farmers' fields, so they outnumber wild pests by a factor of 10 to 1 or more. It says many dead GM insects and some live ones could enter the food chain in vegetables or fruit, but this issue was omitted from the consultation. You really believe all the PR rubbish of to have your best interests at heart. They're concerned about you. And then back into golden rice again, scourge of Asia, Monsanto and Syngenta, Bayer, as well, trigger disruption of peasant economy. It was an initiative of the International Rice Research Institute funded by Monsanto, Syngenta, Bayer, and the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research. Asia's dependency on rice cultivation for both subsistence and income is intuitively understood. Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations estimates the agricultural population of lowland rice cultivation in Asia to be over 470 million, larger than the entire population of the United States. It says Asia's rice farmers produce between 1 and 2 harvests a year and so on, and it gives you an idea how much they do. And it says there are 40,000 natural species of rice, and they're going to try to eliminate them all with their GM rice. Obviously, that's a concern. And then you have to buy their boys, the same guys who own the seed and all the rest of it, you have to go buy their particular pesticides to work with it too, as part of the deal. And then you go into this article here. It says, Russia says the US is expanding bioweapons labs in Europe. And that's from 2016. Russia recently charged the Pentagon with expanding a network of biological weapons laboratories in Europe, a charge the State Department denies. Now, just to get it straight too, for folks who don't know, that when you go into bioweapons, and also into the insects and all the rest of it, it's all part of the same department, modified insects and so on. Remember, mosquitoes were used initially and developed big time during and after World War II to carry deadly pathogens, which could be used on enemy at war with countries. That was the whole purpose of it. Canada, in fact, Ontario, our lab in Ontario, was one of the largest breeders of these developed heavy bomber-type mosquitoes, because it's awfully important if you want some deadly pathogens to actually take in the body, as I say, take. In other words, a big enough dose at one go for it to take off and overcome the body's natural defense system. Then you want a lot to be delivered at once. And so Canada had developed these heavy ones, big ones, that could be loaded up like heavy bombers, and when they basically hit someone with it, that their little stuff they squirt into you, the anticoagulant, of course, that's what they put in. Along with it comes all these different virus or bacterium, whatever it happens to be, goes into your system too. And they sent it into the different bioweapons labs down to the US for years and years. I don't know if they still do it, probably do, but that's also in the book. It was put out. It's all declassified information called Deadly Allies, Canada's Secret War, because Canada led the research field for the bioweapons industries all during World War II and for a good time afterwards as well. But that was one of the main delivery methods was mosquitoes. So you have to be, you better really educate yourself and stop clapping your hands when you see all the public relations stuff from Bill Gates, the rest of them. Oh, we're modifying mosquitoes to help across the third world countries. You look at all the top characters who end up being big philanthropists, and all. I've gone through so much of their histories in the past. You find what they're really into. What's the prime thing they're all into? Population reduction and eugenics. And every big foundation, that's the thing. Plus, destroying national governments, bringing in their own world government, and running our lives properly, the way that we should be run, which is we all do what we say you'll do. Just obey, be obedient, and we'll stamp you as a quality approval stamp on your forehead or whatever, saying, yeah, you can now work in our system, and you'll cause no problems. Instant obedience. Then there's this article, Brazil finds the Zika virus in human urine and saliva, but risk is unclear. Again, fear, terrifying horror, just like the AIDS thing, same thing. And it says here that they found traces of the Zika virus in certain bodily fluids of 2 patients, but said more research is needed to determine if the infection can be transmitted through the fluids. It could be spread through kissing or urine. Quick to point out that this still remains to be proven. So the findings point to the frenetic efforts by researchers in Brazil and other countries to determine if the risk posed by the mosquito-borne Zika virus as it spreads through more than 24 countries in the Americas. So they've linked it to an increase in babies born with abnormally small heads. Microcephaly, or cephaly, sometimes they call it cephaly in the US. The research teams are still trying to prove this connection. And French scientists had already published research last year in the Journal of Clinical Virology that located the Zika virus in human saliva following an outbreak of the virus in 2013 and 14 in French Polynesia. The Brazilian researchers at Fiocruz said that their studies had detected the virus in an active form in human saliva and urine samples, and so on and so on. And then this article here says, who owns the Zika virus? The World Health Organization declared the Zika virus declared a global emergency on Monday, February the 1st, without providing much detail on the disease. So here are some facts until we receive more information. This article says this sexually transmitted virus has been around for 69 years and is marketed by 2 companies. These guys sell it, by the way. These are the companies that sell the virus. LGC Standards, headquartered in the UK, and ATCC, headquartered in the US. The LGC Group is the UK's designated National Measurement Institute for Chemical and Bioanalytical Measurements and an international leader in laboratory services as the ones who sell viruses and bacteria, deadly stuff across the world. and to, of course, the biowarfare labs that a lot of them come out of, I'm sure, including a lot of guys who work on these big companies. Measurement standards, reference materials, genomics, and proficiency testing marketplaces. And it gives you a bit of the bio on the different companies and so on. It says here, the ATCC-LGC partnership is designed to facilitate the distribution of ATCC cultures and bioproducts to life science researchers throughout Europe, Africa, and India, and to make access to the important resources of the ATCC more easily accessible to the European, African, and Indian scientific communities through local stockholding of more than 5,000 individual culture items supported by our local office network, delivering the highest levels of customer service and technical support. This is why is the issue of the patent ownership, the ones who own the patents for this, it's actually patented, of the Zika virus not being the object of media coverage, lest we forget the words of David Rockefeller in an address to the Trilateral Commission meeting in June 1991. He said, "We're grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Time magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world," as a Trilateral Commission. The guys are all that head all the top world banks and so on, central banks, etc. So it would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is more sophisticated and prepared to march toward a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. And that's a factual statement and quote from David Rockefeller, by the way. For those who don't believe there are such things as conspiracies. And he's thanking the major media who will attend it because they're all members too. At least their owners are, for the newspapers and the big chains of news organizations, for not publishing it in their papers, what they're up to. As this then too, is the ownership of the Zika virus by the Rockefeller Foundation part of that agenda of supranational sovereignty, not dominated by the intellectual elite and world bankers. Of significance, the Zika virus is a commodity which can be purchased online from ATCC-LGC for €599, with royalties accruing to the Rockefeller Foundation. And the reason for that is the Rockefeller Foundation were sending scientists out, even in the 30s and 40s and so on, collecting viruses and bacterium from across the planet. And he found it in Africa, and they put the patent on it. They actually bred it too, by the way, to see if it could possibly be made to be to go and be transmitted by mosquitoes. When they found it, it wasn't, apparently. If you go into the old records. So there you go, biowarfare. And then another one too, Zika virus ATCC VR-84. Here's their site, actually. It's a for-profit organization. $516. It's only $430 if you're a non-profit organization, or $516 if you're a for-profit. There you go. And I'll put that up too. And then we have something else too on the go, which is again a big scary thing. This germ can live decades in distilled water, kill humans in 48 hours. Everyone's terrifying, isn't it? Horror news. Give up your brain even, and we'll let experts rule you, right? Intellectual elite, as Rockefeller says, intelligence. A coloured and hand scanning electron micrograph of Burkholderia pseudomallei. These motile bacteria are the cause of the Melioidosis, a tropical disease spread through contaminated water and soil. It can infect the skin, causing inflammation and muscles aches, or the lungs, causing chest pain, cough, and in some cases pneumonia as well. And this goes through this particular disease as well. I wonder who owns that one as well. And another one on the same, if you want to buy it, for those for-profits and non-profit ones too, if you want to buy it, it's very, very similar. You can go into this site, and this is where, of course, remember to all the bioweapons characters, and every country has them under their national security acts. They all have their own bio-warfare plants where they stockpile every disease under the sun and try and modify them into being incredible killers, even the common viruses too. That's old stuff going back again to World War II, for those who don't know about it. Now, for a lot of people who've listened to me for years, they'll have taken note of the mention of David Rockefeller and his foundation, because Rockefeller family were picked for the US as the main organization and their big tax-free foundation, amongst other foundations, to spearhead basically the massive change, internationalism, the blending of the old Soviet type society and socialism with the West and so on. It's all been done, of course, and also to free up sexual liberation. That was a big part of it too, because you don't realize that sexual liberation is a stage of war. When you're obsessed eventually with sex, you can be put into an incredibly poor situation, but you've got lots of sex, lots of pornography to watch and so on, cheap to watch, maybe even free. And then you're defunct, you're out of the running for opposition, basically. I'm not kidding you, but that goes way back to Wilhelm Reich back in the 1930s, who talked about it prolifically. The Freudian school, of course, was behind that too. And Reich was a devotee, and he pushed that. He was also a communist, Reich. So anyway, back to those who still think that everything happens by accident in history, the accidental view. I'm going to jump into, from there, and Rockefeller's obsession with depopulation, the setting up of the Trilateral organization, and everybody who at the head of the IMF, every guy that they sent across to just take over countries like Italy and elsewhere, Greece as well, were all Trilateral members, a specialized organization of the CFR, which was headed at that time by the Rockefellers and is still funded by all their cash, of course, because their foundation goes on regardless of who eventually becomes in charge of it, with the same goals of depopulation. And as David Rockefeller himself said, an intelligent elite, basically, should run the world with the help of the bankers too. So they've already got that on the go, for those who don't know it. And the media is owned by the big boys belonging to the same club. So they can terrify you into compliance. Oh, if you don't get this, you'll die. Or you don't do this, oh, you'll die again, or you'll starve, or you'll get disease if you don't take this shot and all that. It's all terror. But getting back to another part of it too, which works within the same club, you might say, the global strategic trends for the Ministry of Defense in the NATO countries as well. Their predictions for the future out to 2045 on page 94. They go into future weapons. Increased levels of defense spending and continuing advances in technology are likely to lead to a variety of new weapons being available by 2045. Now, they always say what could be available, but they don't tell you that all the stuff they're going to mention is already here. For example, laser systems are maturing with vehicle and sea-based platforms already at advanced stages of trial. No, they've been trialing them for the last 20-odd years, maybe longer. Directed energy weapons such as lasers could be capable of discrete target discrimination. They've been using that too on unsuspecting members of the public for years. producing a focused beam or wider field of electromagnetic energy or atomic radiation to cause disruptive or damaging effects to equipment and infrastructure, but also to the human body, of course. Such weapons may also be capable of developing non-lethal effects on a lower power scale and on human targets at considerable distances. They can actually do it from satellites too, some of them. Increases in the number and sophistication of sensors, civil and military, are likely to increase the accuracy of targeting, as well as making it increasingly difficult to hide people, machines, or equipment. As people use electronic devices more frequently, and here's all your iPhones and your digitalization systems and your cars and everything else, and all the convenient things that you've been sold. You're buying your own chains, naturally. Here they go. It says, so as people use electronic devices more frequently, the ability to target an individual by their digital signature, it says here, and goes on to say, is likely to become easier. Similarly, as the cost of sequencing an individual's DNA continues to fall, right? Targeting an individual using their DNA may be possible by 2045. It's already here, actually, that. They even had it in an old sci-fi movie that where they could set off a rocket that would go around a city and just tour for ages. That was the movie called Exchange. And until it could find you and match you up with you, and it was zoning on you and amongst all these millions of people. Anyway, it says we could also see sophisticated environmental warfare capable of spreading plant and human diseases by insects or insect-machine hybrids. Crops and cattle could be destroyed, as well as people being incapacitated or killed. Globalization, in particular the spread of technology, information, and ideas, is likely to give an increasing number of people, both state and non-state actors, access to sophisticated and technologically advanced capabilities. It's likely to increase the opportunity for unconventional attacks or technologically sophisticated nations, including by terrorists. However, future technology may also be developed to predict, detect, and counter such attacks. But then they go on to the types of warfare and so on, including the different insects they could breed. They were breeding, of course, and could carry diseases and all the rest of it. It's quite interesting, because it ties in what I'm going to say right next, of course, and that's the important part of it too. Here you have a combination of the big agri-food businesses, massive corporations, tied in with the GM food companies, often the same type. One's actually own the big farms. You know, it's multitudes of small farmers that were pushed out, and these guys take them over. They have millions and millions of acres across the world. There's only about 5 of them, prime ones. And they also have the big chemical industries. Same shareholders again, generally, who have the controlling shares in the chemical pesticide industries that go along with the GM food, you'll find. And again, they all turn up at the big international global meetings. See, we're run, as Carl quickly said, by a new feudal system. And that was always, he was all for it, by the way. He was part of it. A feudal system, the new feudal overlords being the CEOs of international corporations, massive corporations. This article says Argentine and Brazilian doctors name a larvicide as potential cause of microcephaly. 10th of February 2016. A report from the Argentinian Doctors Organization, physicians in the crop-sprayed towns, challenges the theory that the Zika virus epidemic in Brazil is the cause of the increase in the birth defect microcephaly amongst newborns. The increase in this birth defect, in which the baby is born with an abnormally small head and often has brain damage, was quickly linked to the Zika virus by the Brazilian Ministry of Health, the government, in other words, department. However, according to the physicians in the crop-sprayed towns, the ministry failed to recognize that the area where most sick people live, a chemical larvicide that produces malformations in mosquitoes, was introduced into the drinking water supply in 2014. This poison, which they call Pyriproxyfen, is used in a state-controlled program aimed at eradicating disease-carrying mosquitoes. So the chemical industry is part of the big boys too, you see. The physicians added that the Pyriproxyfen is manufactured by Sumitomo Chemical, a Japanese strategic partner of Monsanto. Pyriproxyfen is a growth inhibitor of mosquito larvae. It causes mutations, you see. Now it's now in the drinking water. They put it in the drinking water. How would it get in the drinking water? This is the government put it in the drinking water. And it disrupts genetic formations. So accidents don't happen, folks. You'd have to literally have people at the top with tiny IQs, very subnormal, to do something as incredibly stupid. It's not that at all. It's incredibly intelligent, according to the agenda, naturally. So anyway, it's a growth inhibitor of mosquito larvae, which alters the development process from larvae to pupa to adult through its incubation stages. Just put that into a human body, naturally, of a woman who gets pregnant. Same thing. Thus generating malformations in developing mosquitoes and killing or disabling them. It acts as an insect juvenile hormone or juvenoid, and has the effect of inhibiting the development of adult insect characteristics, for example, wings and mature external genitalia, and reproductive development. Isn't that wonderful? It has a lot of effects, all the ones that the big boys desire. It's an endocrine disruptor, like the stuff we're drinking with the bisphenols A's and B's and all the rest of it, in humans. And it's a teratogenetic, which causes birth defects, according to the physicians. They said malformations detected in thousands of children from pregnant women living in areas where the Brazilian state added the Pyriproxyfen to the drinking water are not a coincidence, even though the Ministry of Health, the government department, places a direct blame on the Zika virus for the damage. They also noted that the Zika has traditionally been held to be a relatively benign disease that has never before been associated with birth defects, even in areas where it infects 75% of the population. Well, isn't that amazing news to be told something they've always known, eh? And it says larvicide is the most likely culprit in the birth defects. The Pyriproxyfen is a relatively new introduction to the Brazilian environment. The microcephaly increases a relatively new phenomenon too. So the larvicide seems a plausible causative factor in microcephaly, far more than the GM mosquitoes, which some have blamed for the Zika epidemic and thus for the birth defects. There's no sound evidence to support the notion, promoted by some sources, that GM mosquitoes can cause Zika, which in turn can cause microcephaly. In fact, out of 404 confirmed microcephaly cases in Brazil, only 17, which is 4.2%, tested positive for the Zika virus. So the health experts in Brazil agree that Pyriproxyfen is a chief suspect. It says the Argentinian physician's report, which also addresses the dengue fever epidemic in Brazil, concurs with the findings of a separate report on Zika outbreak by the Brazilian Doctors and Public Health Researchers Organization, Abrasco. Abrasco also names Pyriproxyfen as a likely cause of the microcephaly. It condemns the strategy of chemical control of Zika-carrying mosquitoes, which it says is contaminating the environment as well as people, and is not decreasing the number of mosquitoes. Mainly people, it seems. Abrasco suggests that this strategy is in fact driven by the commercial interests of the chemical industry, which it says is deeply integrated into the Latin American Ministries of Health, as well as the World Health Organization, yep, that is true, and the Pan-American Health Organization. For those who don't know, there is one. Abrasco names the British GM insect company called, guess what, the Bill Gates boys again, Oxitec, as part of the corporate lobby that is distorting the facts about Zika to suit its own profit-making agenda. Yeah, let's send in his modified mosquitoes again, eh? Oxitec sells GM mosquitoes engineered for sterility and markets them as a disease-combating product, a strategy condemned by the Argentine physicians as a total failure, except for the companies supplying the mosquitoes, who profit enormously, obviously. And that goes on to and on, this article here, and it's awfully informative, folks. You see how whenever you hear anything from the World Health Organization, you understand, we're never told any truth pretty well about anything from any government department, never mind international group of non-elected people, such as the WHO, which is part of the United Nations organization, who we don't elect either. Who are all part of they are the supposed embryonic group, the United Nations, of the world government, with this massive umbrella organizations all underneath it. Anyway, I'll go on to other articles too, but I think for those who can follow all this, you're getting the picture, especially when you know the history of this whole plan. I've gone through that ad nauseum over many, many years. And many folk have got their own shows out and copy it as well. They even copy my own bio, some of them. Like going to libraries when you're very young and reading all the books. That's become awfully popular since I said it years and years and years ago, which was true in my case. It's amazing, really, though, how we can be always so misinformed for very nefarious reasons, too, not by accident. It's disgusting, isn't it? And then you get the truth coming out, too. And all this hype and fear and all the massive grants getting thrown again at the big companies to make, get a vaccine quick. And of course, it takes years and years and years to find that. But they get paid for years and years to investigate, trying to get one. And of course, it goes to nowhere. Just like the HIV one went nowhere pretty well too, and so on. But they make billions off of us, of course, because we're the source of all wealth, aren't we? Through your taxation. And then you have family planning for mosquitoes, genetically modified insects to fight the dengue fever. And that goes back to 2012. And it's from the Wellcome Trust, science writing, prize and so on they get. But remember what the Wellcome Trust was called, before that. Awfully important, folks. I'll mention that in a minute. But family planning for mosquitoes, genetically modified insects to fight the dengue fever. And it says, as the early morning sun begins to warm, the slow slung houses and the usual intros that give you give a picture in your mind. The uninformed bystander might be forgiven for taking the whole exercise to be a particularly well planned and malicious prank, but these are no ordinary insects. And Itaberaba's streets are in fact host to a groundbreaking experiment, opened a new front in humanity's battle against a dangerous and highly resilient pest, the Aedes aegypti mosquito. And they go into that one too. It's about modifying them again, through the gates and all the big boys involved. And what really was biowarfare organizations, when you look at the history of biowar, it all started not to help people, but to kill people, folks, back in the 1940s and onwards. As I say, it's an excellent book, that Canada's Secret War, Deadly Allies, written by a reporter from a Toronto Star newspaper. Fantastic history. It really opens your eyes. Everything is a side effect that comes out of war, you see. Well, now we want to sell these things to help you. But the same agenda goes on of depopulation. So when you find folk who belong to the lucky gene club at the top, who come out and say, now that we're multi-billionaires or trillionaires, we want to help you. And they all will believe in depopulation, but at the same time they want you to be healthy when you're alive. Are you going to trust them, really, folks? And they get to Wellcome Trust again. And what were they called before they called themselves Wellcome Company? They were called the Eugenics Society. Yep. And they published all their charts and so on about eugenics. And George Philip and Son Limited, and the Galton, Francis Galton, Darwin, that bunch, that they're all involved with it, of course, and they go through a lot of it there. And it gives you some of the archives of the Eugenics Society, if you can get into their site, of course, and maybe open your eyes. I do an awful lot of writing for a lot of writers here, a lot of investigation, I should say, for them. And they just grab this stuff and never mention you at all. And they write books and they sell them money. And they make lots of money selling the books, I should say. United Nations urges Latin American countries to loosen their abortion laws, because that's again, terrify the public. It's a mosquito that's causing it. No, it's not. We know it's not that now. But they'll keep on their mantra, just like global warming. They keep the mantra up even when you're freezing to death at 45, 50 below. On both scales, centigrade and Fahrenheit. Doesn't matter, you see. Truth doesn't matter when they've got agendas at work. So here you have the United Nations urging Latin American countries to loosen abortion laws. 6th of February, you see. Just right on target. Terrify. All your babies are all pinheads, you see. Abort. So they go into action right away. They don't miss a chance, and actually, because depopulation is what they're after too. So a global mounting concern over Zika virus, health officials Friday warned pregnant women to think twice about the lips they kiss and called on men to use condoms with pregnant partners if they have visited countries where the virus is present. Also called many Catholic majority countries in Latin America to loosen their abortion laws. They've been after that forever. David Rockefeller got an introduction to the Pope back years and years ago. And because he brought a cardinal on board his team on the Rockefeller staff, basically, and a chap put him in charge of the foundation for a while, and bought him off. Gave him lots of honorary titles, about over 150 titles for this cardinal. And the cardinal eventually got him to see the Pope, and the Pope literally laid the whole thing down to loosen abortion laws back then. That's way back, maybe probably even back in the 50s, in fact. It's always been their agenda, you see. Anyway, so they're here there again. Here's the World Health Organization continuing the same agenda. To loosen their abortion laws for Catholics to allow women to terminate pregnancies if they fear the fetus may be at risk for rare birth defects. There you go. See? And then another article. Prepare for guerrilla warfare with Zika-carrying mosquitoes, experts warn. Experts again. It must be true, eh? Experts say so. You can't bribe the experts, can you, eh? Look at all the scientists that have jumped on the bandwagon for extreme climate change caused by it's humans that are causing it. It's all your fault agenda, eh? For the big fat paychecks, which they never had before. If they hadn't dreamed up this con, you see, to control all our lives, that's what it's for, and to bring in their new system, completely a controlled society, as Rockefeller said, run by the elites and intelligentsia and the bankers. The experts in money, they always crash you all the time. As a weapon, actually, as enrich themselves, they keep crashing you, and then we get bailed out by us again, you see. Now it's bail-ins and bailouts coming, and then they'll bring in a new system again. But they're still their system, but a new system, part of the new system. You see, all works together. One club, you see. So, in a Chile convention center ballroom, the leading lights of mosquito control gathered all the experts of mosquito control, who will also be all the experts in the biowarfare industry, by the way. Of course they are. As they do every year, to talk about bugs and new ways to get rid of them. So this year it's the unpredictable new weapon, the Zika virus. That's what it says. It's a weapon. A threat that left the participants comparing notes like field commanders before summer battle. And there it goes on and on and on. But it's true enough to see, introduced that chemical I mentioned earlier into their drinking water in Brazil 2 years ago. Here it says nearly a year after the first case of Zika were diagnosed in Brazil, so that's how long it took to start working in the human system, which is suspected to cause birth defects and other neurological problems, is bearing down on American shores. So there you go. Now it's been an interesting little study to go into where it's supposedly already spread to Puerto Rico and the United States Virgin Islands, etc., and find out if that same chemical is part of the big Monsanto group subsidiary, the Japan that makes it, to see if they're also using the same stuff there. Won't it? This is common sense, isn't it? Now I'll close up by, again, going into the Ministry of Defence's projection of the future and how it ties in again with all of the aforementioned stuff, all the investigative stuff I've done already. And you have global population by 10-year age group and sex, male and female, from 2015 to 2045, and their estimates what it's going to be. And that's on page 5 of the PDF is out there. I'll put that up, all the stuff up tonight. Remember, I always put everything up for you to verify for yourselves. And it also goes into the same kind of thing. All their worries about there'll be less and less people needed for working across the world, and in some third world countries don't have the welfare state basically we all have now, as we've been socialized or communized. The state controls everything, yeah. And that's no coincidence either, by the way, but it's still run by the big private boys with their foundations and so on. But it's also into from pages 21 to 23, you'll find that, and then page 31 again on population, because they're awfully concerned about the population. It's always been their problem, and they won't need you anymore because you don't have all the work. It's all in China now, and the same experts and elites of your countries, as Rockefeller was one of them, has shipped it all off to China. That was always the plan, and you're left as a service economy, which is going down the tubes, because all service economies, as every top economist knows, and actually wrote screeds about back in the 70s, even in Britain and elsewhere, they could only paddle in the pool so long before you were exhausted and then you sunk and drowned. If you don't create stuff, you're down the tubes, especially with a welfare state that's expanding massively. Well, because for every couple of people on welfare, you've got another agency or 10 employees for the government working over them, etc., as you all well know. And in the report from the Ministry of Defence think tank, they got on to about selective abortions and so on, and diseases which affect girls and so on, blah, blah, in different parts of the world, yada, yada, and Chinese migration as they expand, and all the rest of it. And migration is likely to increase, or at least remain constant. In 2005, 191 million people lived outside their country of origin. Today there are around 232 million. This figure already exceeds our earlier assessment in the 4th edition of Global Strategic Trends. Those countries attempting to limit immigration are likely to be only partially successful because it's mandated, and every leader is on board with it because they're part of the same club. In preceding decades, migration has been characterized by people moving from Asia and Africa to Northern America and Europe. So they give you all their fancy charts. They love charts. What to do with gross domestic product and purchasing power parity, etc., and the global economic center of gravity shifting. It's called gravity shifting. And Asia will cause the world's economic center of gravity, the average location of economic activity by gross GDP, to continue to move eastwards. Well, that's how it's big. It was planned like that back in the 1930s by the Rockefeller boys too, who funded all the books put out for their members, and I have them here from the 1930s, talking about setting China up as provider for the world, basically manufacturing. We're living through a big script, as I say, and it's awfully boring, isn't it? And a lot of folk want hope and they want entertainment with the bad news. Well, I'll just give you the facts, folks. It's up to you how you want to receive it or feel about it. I'm giving you the facts. And remember, too, I always say you are your own champion. Don't look to any leader, because they'll supply your leaders for you. They'll give you the rah-rah cheerleading thing, And screaming and yelling about things isn't stopping anything. Never has. From Hamish myself from Ontario, Canada, it's good night to me. Your God or your gods go with you.